A landscape unfolds before us, at once fantastical, yet uncannily familiar. An architectural ensemble is rendered with such grandeur that the mind immediately draws parallels to the great northern capital of Russia. To the right, a monumental palace rises, one that any observer might mistake for the Hermitage. Before it, a triumphant column soars toward the sky, nearly indistinguishable from the great Alexander Column in St. Petersburg. Just below, framing the vast plaza, stands a rostral column, its shaft bristling with the menacing prows of warships, the very symbol that would become the signature of Vasilyevsky Island. Closer still, an Egyptian stele, etched with mysterious script. And chained to its base, 4 figures of Moors. The exact same sculptural motif is known to us from the landscapes of St. Petersburg. An equestrian monument, a rider powerfully astride his mount, completes the scene. The collection of elements is so specific, so complete, it creates the overwhelming sensation that we are witnessing an alternate reality, a St. Petersburg from another universe. But the truth is far more confounding. This is not St. Petersburg, nor is it the fantasy of a contemporary artist. This is Rome, as captured in the year 1743 by the celebrated engraver Giovanni Battista Piranesi. The work was published in his album Prima parte di architetture e prospettive, and titled by the artist himself, The Ancient Capital. This single fact presents a profound chronological and geographical paradox. How could an artist, in the first half of the 18th century, depict the precise architectural DNA of a city whose most iconic symbols, according to official history, would only appear decades later, thousands of kilometers from Italy? Art historians and academics offer a tidy explanation for the phenomenon. They assert that Piranesi was working in the genre of architectural fantasy, the capriccio. In their view, this engraving is not a documentary record, but an elaborate compilation. The artist, they argue, simply gathered disparate elements seen across Italy, rostral columns, obelisks, statues, and fused them through the power of his imagination, creating a majestic vision of an ancient Rome that never truly existed in this form. Perhaps Piranesi was merely a gifted fantasist, creating on paper a world that never was. And yet the image is arresting in its meticulous detail, its strange and deliberate system. If this is simply a flight of fancy, why does it adhere to such a specific, almost prescriptive canon? Why, in this imagined space, must there be precisely 4 Moors chained to the stone? It is a detail too specific for mere whimsy, forcing us to question the very nature of inspiration, whether the artist is simply inventing a future, or perhaps remembering a past that has been forgotten. Why are the figures chained to the pedestal? Why does the composition insist upon the presence of a triumphal arch, of funerary urns, and of Egyptian obelisks, all in this precise, unyielding arrangement? Individually, these elements are familiar. We see them today, scattered across the great cities of St. Petersburg and Rome. But in the world envisioned by the artist Piranesi, they are assembled into a single, cohesive whole. An unsettling feeling arises. The official narrative, that this is merely an artist's medley, begins to fracture, struggling to conceal the existence of a unified architectural standard. Or perhaps, even a once living city, later dismantled, its grand statements quoted and dispersed across nations. As we delve deeper into the work known as the Ancient Capital, we are confronted by a staggering density of detail, a complexity that confounds any attempt to dismiss it as simple artistic fiction. If we accept the official view that Giovanni Battista Piranesi was merely an inspired compiler arranging beautiful forms at random, a fundamental question emerges. What is the nature of this randomness? Why is the vocabulary of his imagination so specific, so recurrent? This is not a chaotic jumble of stone. It is a rigorously ordered system where each object occupies its logical place, as if part of a tangible, master-planned urban environment. In the engraving, we see the complete lexicon, today scattered across the museums of the world, but here brought together. 4 Moors, chained to a pedestal, stand beside Egyptian stelae carved with hieroglyphs. Triumphal arches rise near rostral columns. Their ship-honorary urns hold the silence of ages. This architectural code, which modern historians attribute to disparate epochs and cultures, exists in Piranesi's vision in a single space and time. It is difficult to believe that an artist, guided solely by aesthetic instinct, could have foreseen the precise combination of symbols that, centuries later, would become the signature of an entirely different city on the banks of the Neva. The probability of such a detailed and accurate coincidence, born of blind fantasy, approaches 0. Furthermore, the technical execution of this supposedly non-existent world surpasses many documentary sketches of the era. Piranesi does not merely draw beautiful ruins, he renders them with the precision of an engineer. We see complex joinery in the stone blocks, a deliberate system for the placement of monuments, the functional elements of a living city. This world feels inhabited, logical, and, most critically, technologically unified. If this is fiction, then its author possessed knowledge of a civilization whose capabilities exceeded what is officially attributed to antiquity. The persistent impression is that we are not looking at the fruit of a singular imagination. We are looking at a record, a document of a world not dreamed, but remembered. They are not merely engravings, but documentary evidence of a lost, global architecture. A world, captured on paper, that knows no borders between the Roman and the Egyptian, between the classical and the forms we have come to as. Here, obelisks, equestrian statues, and grand colonnades appear as standard elements of a single gargantuan capital, a set of blueprints unified across vast and disparate territories. If we allow for the possibility that the artist, Piranesi, was not inventing, but was drawing directly from life, even a life already in ruins, then our entire chronology of architectural development demands a radical revision. The sheer scale and volume of the work, however, force us to question the identity of the author himself. For Piranesi is more than the surname of an 18th century artist. Upon detailed study of his legacy, it becomes clear that this name is a brand, concealing something far larger than one man with a stylus. A vast body of engravings is officially attributed not to the master, but to his workshop, his students. And it is precisely within these works that even stranger inconsistencies begin to surface. Discrepancies that touch not only upon architecture, but upon the very foundations of ancient belief. The legacy left under the name Giovanni Battista Piranesi is so immense that it inevitably raises the question of physical possibility. How could one man create such a number of impossibly complex engravings? It becomes obvious that Piranesi was not a lone artist, but a veritable corporation for the documentation of an 18th century reality. His workshop was a factory of images, operating with astonishing productivity. And among these pieces, often dismissed as copies or student exercises, we find artifacts that completely shatter the conventional timeline of history. A stark example of such a discrepancy is a series of engravings dedicated to antique Egyptian vases. One such work, believed to have been executed by the master's assistant, Johann Fischer, or to have emerged from the workshop in the 1720s, depicts a lavish vase with an inscription indicating a cult of the ibis. For anyone familiar with the basic course of history, the ibis cult is an unmistakable marker of ancient Egypt. We expect to see the characteristic Egyptian style, figures in profile, specific headdresses, hieroglyphs, and the attendant architecture of the Nile Valley. What is fixed on the paper, however, triggers a profound cognitive dissonance. The image does indeed feature the sacred bird, worshipped by human figures, but the surrounding environment has nothing in common with the Egypt of the pharaohs. The scene unfolds in a setting indistinguishable from classical Greece or Rome. We are left looking at a memory of two worlds, two epochs, that our history books tell us should never have met. We are left to wonder if the clear lines we have drawn through the past are real, or if they are merely a convenient fiction, obscuring a far more complex and interwoven truth. An elegant rotunda with classical columns, figures draped in togas. The architectural language speaks of a fully developed European antiquity. But the scene it contains is a strange hybrid, a religious narrative from the depths of ancient Egypt, placed in a world that should be millennia away. The official explanation is simple. Artists of the 18th century, we are told, had a poor understanding of historical styles, mixing everything together for the sake of a beautiful picture. But the workshop of Piranesi was famed for its scrupulous attention to detail. What if this is not an artist's error, but a record of a reality we have misread? If the art depicts ancient Egypt, perhaps what we have separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles actually existed simultaneously, within a single cultural tradition. This fusion of styles suggests the existence of a unified antique world, where Egyptian and Roman elements were not sequential stages of civilization, but integrated parts of one whole. This confusion, or rather this alternate logic, is not limited to decorative objects. If artists and engravers of that era treated historical attributes with such freedom, or if they were documenting a syncretism we can no longer comprehend, then our trust in the official interpretations of much larger objects begins to rapidly crumble. If we are misreading the stories on pottery, it is highly probable that the purpose of the cyclopean structures captured by the very same workshop is also explained to us in a way that is profoundly incorrect. Behind the beautiful facades and antique fantasies may lie constructions and walls whose function is far more prosaic, more technological than we are led to believe. Nowhere is this mystery more potent than in the most debated pages of Giovanni Battista Piranesi's work, the famous series of etchings titled Carceri d'Invenzione, the imaginary prisons. For traditional art history, these works are the quintessence of dark romanticism and psychological pressure. Academic scholarship insists that we are witnessing the fruit of a fevered imagination, architectural nightmares with no connection to reality. Art historians point to the impossible geometry, the endless staircases leading nowhere, and the gigantic, oppressive vaults, arguing that to build such a thing in stone would be physically impossible, and that functionally, such structures would have no purpose at all. However, if we discard the imposed label of prisons and view these engravings through the eyes of an engineer or an architect, a completely different picture emerges. The grim dungeons, with their cyclopean masonry, suddenly bear a striking resemblance not to places of criminal confinement, but to grandiose, technical, subterranean complexes. We are left to wonder if we are looking at the madness of an artist or the last, fading memory of a forgotten world. Vast, cavernous spaces, pierced by arches and bride colossal mechanism, the life support system of a forgotten metropolis. The chains, the pulleys, the great winch wheels, long interpreted as instruments of torment, reveal themselves upon closer inspection to be something far more prosaic. The machinery of construction, the mechanisms for servicing sluice gates, for hoisting immense loads. This hypothesis finds its most compelling support when we turn our gaze to a neighboring region, once also part of the ancient world. In modern-day Turkey, a multitude of subterranean structures have survived, known as cisterns. The most celebrated among them is the Basilica Cistern of Istanbul. These are real, existing subterranean edifices, and their scale, their architecture, their very atmosphere are nearly identical to the phantasms of Piranesi. Rows of massive columns, vaulted ceilings receding into darkness, water pooling at their foundations. This is not fantasy. It is a standard design for the hydro-technical engineering of the past. If one were to drain the Istanbul cisterns and fill them with the timber scaffolding required for maintenance, what emerges is a startlingly precise replica of the engravings from the Prisons series. The logical conclusion is that Piranesi was not inventing, but documenting what he witnessed with his own eyes in Italy. It suggests that beneath Rome and other ancient cities lies a sprawling, undiscovered network of similar subterranean communications, collectors, reservoirs, and technical floors, remnants of a preceding, highly advanced civilization. What art history has long dismissed as the caprices of an artist may in fact be a documentary record, a sketch of the now flooded or sealed levels of the Eternal City, a world to which the modern tourist is strictly denied access. To understand that these colossal underground halls were merely the utilitarian underpinnings of a city's infrastructure is to completely reevaluate the technological prowess of that era. The builders capable of erecting such technical levels possessed knowledge and capabilities that seem far beyond the reach of primitive manual labor. And perhaps the most astonishing part of this story is that the evidence of this supreme stone-cutting mastery, of these inexplicable technologies, need not be sought in the sealed vaults beneath Rome or Istanbul. Artifacts of an identical complexity, an impossibility according to the official historical narrative, stand quietly in the open air in what was once considered a barbaric Russia, largely unnoticed and unappreciated. Within the extensive catalogue of works from Piranesi's famed workshop, one piece holds a special significance. A detailed sketch of an architectural element, attributed to the draftsman Nicolas-François Daniel Lullier. On this sheet, rendered with photographic accuracy, is a capital, the ornate, crowning piece of a column believed to be from within the Roman pantheon. It forces a profound question. How much of our accepted history is based not on evidence, but on a failure of imagination? What other truths lie hidden in plain sight, dismissed as fantasy, waiting only for us to adjust our perspective and see them for what they truly are? It is a symphony carved in stone, an impossibly complex floral ornament, its geometry of scrolling vines perfect, its relief so deep it sculpts light and shadow itself. This is the work we are told is the benchmark of mastery, the summit toward which European architecture strove for centuries, resurrecting long-lost knowledge. Gazing upon such perfection, one is conditioned to believe that these masterworks are only possible in the cradle of civilization. In the warm climate of Italy, where marble is yielding and the traditions of the stonecutter have flowed uninterrupted for millennia. But the persistent cliché of an 18th century Russia, a primitive laggard on the fringes of Europe, shatters into dust. To witness this, one need only travel from the heart of Rome to the suburbs of St. Petersburg. In the shaded alleys of Gatchina Park, far from the well-trodden tourist paths, stand the so-called forgotten gates. Time and nature conspire to hide them from view, Yet this monument is crowned with a capital whose complexity of execution, elegance of line, and technique of stone processing does not merely rival, but arguably surpasses the celebrated examples of the Roman Pantheon. Here we see the same incredible level of detail, the same filigree work etched into unyielding stone, a material that resists erosion even in a harsh northern climate. And here, a question arises, one deeply unsettling to the official narrative of history. From where, in a Russia considered technologically backward compared to enlightened Europe, did the means to create such marvels emerge? The official version, of serf artisans armed with mallet and chisel, seems a quaint fiction when confronted with the reality of shaping granite and marble to this standard. To replicate such a capital today would require high-precision, computer-numerically controlled machines and diamond-tipped cutters. To achieve this quality by hand in hard stone is a near impossibility, a task demanding decades of labor for a single piece, free of any flaw. And in Gatchina, as in St. Petersburg, such artifacts number in the thousands. This observation forces a radical reevaluation. We are not witnessing a mere imitation of style, but the signature of a single, unified technological standard. Rome and the suburbs of St. Petersburg, separated by thousands of kilometers, appear as 2 points in a single production chain, one that employed an identical and now lost machine technology for working stone. The impression becomes inescapable that the Pantheon and the structures of Gatchina were erected by one and the same civilization, a culture for which such architectural extravagance was not a monumental feat, but the accepted norm. These silent witnesses of the past are astonishingly resilient. They have outlasted centuries, preserving their form against the relentless assault of rain, snow, and wind. Time itself could not destroy them, and they remain a mute reproach to our own forgetfulness. However, a closer examination of the historical record, the engravings of the artist Piranesi, makes it clear that this magnificence was forced to contend with far more than the slow passage of centuries. Etched onto paper is the evidence of another, far more sudden force. It is not the gentle fading of antiquity we witness, but the aftermath of a catastrophe so vast, its scars have been mistaken for the slow work of time. Within the vast legacy of etchings and engravings depicting classical ruins, a disturbing narrative unfolds. We see what appears to be a romantic melancholy for a bygone era, but closer inspection reveals a meticulous chronicle of a world undone. The common assumption that had stood in desolation for more than 1,000 years. And yet, the discerning eye finds details in stark opposition to this official chronology. Among the heaps of toppled columns, the shattered cornices, and the remnants of cyclopean walls lie unsettling elements. The half-skeletons. These figures, often perched atop the highest point of a ruin or tangled in the stone debris, are not the bleached, scattered bones one might find after centuries of exposure. The artists depicted remains that retained the integrity of a full skeleton, sometimes with fragments of tissue still clinging to them. From a biological and forensic standpoint, this points not to an ancient demise, but to a death chillingly recent. Had the cataclysm that leveled these majestic structures occurred in deep antiquity, over 1,500 years, any organic remains left in the open air would have turned to dust, been carried away by scavengers, or buried beneath meters of soil. The fact that these skeletons lie directly upon the surface of the rubble, or sit atop half-demolished arches, speaks to a single, stark conclusion. These people died, either in the very moment the buildings were destroyed, or shortly thereafter, amidst the fresh ruins. This observation radically alters the timeline. Piranesi, living in the 18th century, emerges not as an amateur archaeologist, but as a documentarian, capturing a post-apocalyptic landscape. The catastrophe that turned a flourishing civilization into a wasteland of stone did not occur in some mythical dark age. It happened just before the artist's time, perhaps in the 17th or even the 18th century. We are looking at a world reeling from a devastating blow, be it a natural cataclysm of unimaginable power or a war waged with some unknown formidable weapon. Grandiose idiotive by a blast wave, and the survivors, often depicted as diminutive and bewildered figures, wander through the remnants of a civilization of giants, powerless to rebuild, unable even to comprehend the purpose of the ruins they inhabit. The majestic vistas of antiquity, then, are not the legacy of distant ancestors. They are the fresh wounds of a recent tragedy. A history artificially lengthened, an event that erased a unified, global civilization from the face of the earth, systematically expunged from memory, leaving only silent, stone witnesses to a truth we have been taught to ignore. The past is not merely lost to time, it is buried. Generations of memory are eroded, and the scars of physical destruction can be blamed on the passage of centuries or the hands of invaders. An ideological cleansing is far more difficult to conceal. Someone, at some point, endeavored not only to clear away the rubble of a former age, but to rewrite its very soul, substituting foundational symbols right before our eyes. And the proof of this forgery lies not in some sealed archive, but in the most accessible of sources, waiting for anyone willing to compare the old sketches with what is presented to us today. Among the countless architectural plans and drawings left to us from the 18th century, one piece of evidence exists that could overturn our understanding of Europe's religious history. It concerns the Church of Santa Maria del Priorato, perched on the Aventine Hill in Rome. The building belongs to the enigmatic Knights of Malta, an order shrouded in legend. Official history tells us that the master engraver, Giovanni Battista Piranesi, was responsible for the temple's reconstruction and design. Yet, if one consults the sketches for the lower part of the main altar, executed by the master or his studio in the 18th century, and compares them to what stands in the church today, a staggering act of historical falsification is revealed. In the original antique engraving, the central place in the altar's composition is occupied by symbolism that is profoundly non-Christian. It depicts an animal which, on closer inspection, is unmistakably identified as a young bull or a calf. Its horns have not yet fully grown, but its characteristic tail is clearly visible. With its foreleg, the creature holds a standard, a cross bearing two horizontal bars. The image leaves no room for interpretation. In the 18th century, the high altar of a church in the very heart of Rome, a stone's throw from the Vatican, was dedicated to a calf. This seems impossible. The official narrative asserts that paganism was eradicated many centuries prior, and Rome was the unshakable bastion of Christianity. And yet, the documents of the era impassively record the cult of the bull. Now, let us journey to our time and observe the modern adornment of that very same altar. The composition remains, but its meaning has been radically altered. In place of the smooth, muscular calf, the centerpiece is now a sheep, thickly covered in wool, the classic Christian Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God. The standard it holds has also been transformed. It now bears only a single crossbar, conforming to canonical depiction. Furthermore, to permanently anchor the new religious identity, figures of angels have been added all around, and in the lower portion, a Madonna and Child have appeared, none of which existed in Piranesi's original design. What took place here was not a restoration. It was a total substitution of concepts. A sculpture was not repaired, it was replaced, its original identity scrubbed from history. It forces a disquieting question. If a symbol so central, in a place so prominent, could be so completely overwritten, what else has been reshaped? What other truths have been quietly altered, leaving us to inherit a history that is not what was, but what we have been told? They transmuted the ram into a lamb, adding saints to retroactively baptize a pagan symbol. The most shocking revelation in this discovery is the timeline. If the artist Piranesi documented the original ram in the 18th century, and the lamb appeared later, it means the process of rewriting religious history and the physical alteration of sacred structures occurred in the very recent past, perhaps the 19th or even the 20th century. Before our very eyes, an entire stratum of history tied to the worship of the bull was systematically erased and replaced with the familiar narrative of Christianity. One shudders at the scale of such a manipulation. If these falsifiers could secretly replace the central idol in the heart of the eternal city, rebuild its altar, and convince the entire world it had always been so, what could have stopped them from making far more grandiose alterations? If a god can be substituted, then erasing a city from the face of the earth presents no great challenge. This leads to a disquieting thought, that the now disparate sites of Rome, St. Petersburg, and the ruins of Baalbek are not merely similar monuments. They are shards of a once unified global structure, methodically shattered and concealed. The accumulation of disconnected facts, of architectural strangeness and outright falsifications, inevitably leads to a bold and frightening hypothesis. The visual identity between St. Petersburg and Rome, the inexplicable technological prowess of the ancients, the stylistic confusion, the very altars themselves, these are not random anomalies. They are scattered fragments of a single, colossal mosaic. When pieced together, the outline of a reality meticulously erased from the history books begins to emerge. It can be argued, with a high degree of probability, that in the relatively recent past, the planet was dominated by a single global civilization, possessing a standardized architectural and engineering code. What we today call ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, or Imperial St. Petersburg are in fact the surviving districts or provincial centers of one boundless megalopolis. This global entity knew no state borders in our modern sense, and was connected by a network of high-technology communications, structures we now mistakenly identify as temples, aqueducts, or dungeons. The illusion of diverse ancient cultures is an artificial construct. Historians have taught us to distinguish the Corinthian order from the Egyptian style, assigning them to different millennia. But in the engravings of the 18th century, these elements coexist organically, as part of a single, unified ensemble. The majestic colonnades of Baalbek, the granite embankments of the Neva, the forums of Italy, these are not echoes of one another, but broken pieces of the same colossal infrastructure. They were built by the same hands, from the same blueprints, using the same machinery, all within the same historical period. The evidence suggests we are not looking at the dawn of many civilizations, but at the twilight of one. And we are left to wander through its ruins, mistaking a library for a tomb, a power station for a temple, forever piecing together a past that was never meant to be remembered. We are inheritors of a world we do not comprehend. Squatters, living in a home built by giants after a cataclysm erased them from memory. We exist among ruins we have claimed as our own. Their palaces are now our museums, their government halls our administrative buildings. Their vast technical hangars have been repurposed as places of worship, while their complex energy installations stand as silent monuments, triumphal arches and obelisks, their true purpose forgotten. The new masters, unable to replicate the technologies of the past, simply adapted this inheritance to their own primitive needs. They rewrote the documentation. A sprawling global city-state was annihilated by a cataclysm whose nature remains an enigma. From its wreckage, the survivors began to build anew. To explain the presence of inexplicable artifacts, to mask the stark reality of a profound degradation, a new and elongated history was conceived in the 19th century. But if we accept the theory of a single, unified civilization, the most intriguing question of all emerges. Who were its builders? Who inhabited this global world before it was shattered and renamed? Official history offers a simple answer. Men in togas with the clean-shaven faces we see immortalized in marble. But among the thousands of images left behind by the meticulous chroniclers of that era, there are portraits that shatter this classical stereotype. A single face, captured with documentary precision, hints that the true composition of this lost world was entirely different, and perhaps far more familiar than we have been led to believe. Hidden within the countless engravings and sketches bequeathed to us by the 18th century, there exists one portrait capable of delivering a shock as profound as any cyclopean ruin. We have long asked what technologies this civilization used, what gods it worshipped. Now, it is time to look upon the face of those who may have been the true masters of this global metropolis. In the catalogues of the Piranesi workshop, it is an image that art historians label with dry academic certainty. A copy of an ancient sculpture, perhaps the head of a Dacian. But to an eye familiar with the history of Eastern Europe, this face speaks a different language. It is a man with a thick, flowing beard and hair that falls to his shoulders. His features, the cut of his eyes, the shape of his nose, and above all his expression of powerful, calm wisdom, bear no resemblance to the familiar images of antiquity. This is not the face of Julius Caesar, of Cicero, of Nero, whose smooth profiles fill our textbooks and the halls of European museums. Staring back from the page is a countenance that is achingly familiar to the inhabitants of the Slavic lands. It is a face that does not belong to the story we have been told. It suggests that our entire history is built upon the ruins of another, its people not erased, but merely renamed. And we are left to wonder, what other truths lie hidden in plain sight, dismissed as mere art, waiting for a generation willing to see? Before us, an image seems to step from a lost epic. A prince, a chieftain, an elder. His entire bearing speaks to a tradition far removed from the classical world we know, echoing a forgotten, pre-imperial age. This single observation unearths a profound question. Why, in the hallowed halls of the Vatican, the Louvre, or the Hermitage, are we surrounded by an overwhelming majority of statues cut from a single Greco-Roman cloth? Where did the likenesses of bearded men, such as this noble Dacian, vanish to? Official history has an expedient answer, labeling such figures as barbarians or captive kings, a deliberate attempt to diminish their stature. But the serene dignity in his posture, the sheer mastery of the stone, tells another story entirely. This was not a conquered subject. This was a figure of the ruling class, a man of profound status, whose memory was deemed worthy of being immortalized. A disquieting possibility begins to form, that following a great cataclysm and the redrawing of the world, history itself underwent not just an architectural, but an ethnic cleansing. The statues of these bearded creators were systematically destroyed, hidden away in deep archives, or simply relabeled, recast as vanquished foes. The pedestals were cleared to make way for a new, clean-shaven archetype of the classical hero. a narrative more convenient for the storytellers who came after. If we entertain the notion that the great builders of Rome and St. Petersburg were one and the same people, this portrait becomes a missing link, binding geography to genealogy. Perhaps the majestic colonnades and granite embankments were not raised by mythical southerners in sandals, but by a people of a different anthropological type entirely, a people whose culture and achievements were later claimed by others. We have been taught to look upon antiquity as something alien, a distant civilization with no connection to our own. We never suspect that we might be looking at the deliberately forgotten history of our own ancestors. The journey has taken us from impossible architecture and technologies that defy our own, through the silent evidence of global catastrophe and the subversion of belief, to the very faces of the forgotten builders. These fragments, when assembled, paint a picture of the world radically different from the one we have been taught. Whether one accepts this vision of the past is a choice. The ultimate aim is not to believe, but to learn to see. To look upon the familiar engravings in a book or the silent facades on your own city streets with new eyes, refusing to blindly trust the plaques written by the victors. History is recorded in stone. It is merely waiting for us to begin to read it for ourselves.